Welcome back to Neon Galactic, a podcast produced by PBS affiliate Key TV in Northern California. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. Throughout history, there have been singular individuals who have an outsized impact on the shape and pace of societal evolution and cultural outcomes. Men and women who have a kind of gravitational pull where fate and circumstance are concerned. These are the heroes and sometimes the villains of our collective past and present, those special few who seem to shape history around their long reach and fateful strides. Our guest today, Lou Elizondo, is not and never claimed to be solely responsible for the progress made these past 7 years in the UAP topic. But he did strike a formative blow. By resigning from the DoD and going public on UAP, he broke a hole through the decades-old impasse, made a crack in the wall of generational secrecy, even as the old guard sought to grind him down. He's been a stalwart soldier for transparency and the human right for each of us to know the nature of our own being. He's not perfect and he doesn't claim to be, but he is determined and his impact has been felt. And through this often messy process, in contrast to many in the public sphere today, he's resisted purely partisan gamesmanship and has made a clear point of engaging both sides of our long-running political polarities, such as the only lonely path of a true change agent. His critics may decry the discipline he maintains in keeping to what he's allowed to say and do, but he's never once claimed to be an institutional arsonist, upfront about respecting the dictates of national security while simultaneously pushing for change. He's been surfing a razor's edge for years, revealing what he can while working hard to expand that envelope. There have been costs, personal and professional, but nothing so far has silenced him. Say what you will about Lou Elizondo, he will be marked by history, even as his influence continues to mount. Because, as we know, the work goes on. A new president, old political fault lines, wealthy wildcard wannabes wanting access to the wondrous, military industrialists, worldview warfare, rampant political division, and now whistleblowers who tell of shadowy thugs, lawmakers afraid for their lives, deep psychic secrets, and all the hidden hands so furiously fisted at sudden risk of getting lopped off at the elbow. So what do we make of all this? What can we prove? What do we know to be true? The endless sightings and encounters, the spies and lies, leaks and layered stories, they all certainly smell like smoke. We need to find the fire without getting burnt. We pray folks like Lou Elizondo, like Dave Grush and Jake Barber will help guide us in the wilderness, through this maze of root-ridden caves and over a trackless swamp of forgotten graves and the bones of Cold War heroes. They've had the access and they're pushing back on a system broken by lies. So is it as they say? Are we finally honing in? Will that growing glimmer of hope on the horizon become a beacon to guide us toward transformative solutions? It would be the ending we all deserve. Yet, of course, questions linger. Trust must be earned. Are we being played, and to what end? How in the hell can we tell? That, in part, is the dilemma we face, whether and who to believe when we've long been swimming in falsity. All we can do is move forward, trusting those who earn it and take the kinds of action that benefit the whole, not just those seeking profit and power. If that is the test, Lou Elizondo, in my estimation, will pass. My questions today, like every episode of Neon Galactic, will embrace the woo and much else besides. What is this universe that we're in? Not the one our forebears believed, that seems certain, but if indeed the knowers know and are afraid to say, what have they learned about who we really are and where we might be going? What does it mean to lose the top spot in this existential food chain? Why has it been so hard after all these years to come clean? These are just some of the questions I hope to explore with our guest today, a truly American phenomenon, Lou Elizondo. Welcome.
Wow. James, I don't know what to say. I got to tell you, I've never, ever in my entire life, God's truth, have I ever heard an intro like that. You are a poet. Oh
I
my
appreciate
goodness.
that, man.
No, I'm telling you, man, that forgive me, still getting over COVID a little bit. Um, you captured both sides of the argument and then all the things in the middle very succinctly. So bravo to you.
Thank you.
Whatever your personal thoughts about me aside, that was an incredible, incredible intro. And you have expressed a lot of things that I have personally felt that I have not been successful in expressing succinctly, like you just did. So, wow, that was pretty incredible. That was very impressive.
Well, thank you, man. I think this subject is incredible and important, and part of what I try to do on the show is frame it in a way that gives it the what I think is the weight that it kind of deserves, and So I
Well,
appreciate you
yeah,
saying
presenting
that.
both sides and everything in the middle. I mean, you did. That. I mean, again, I've never heard of an intro like that ever, and I've been doing some of these for a while now. Um, Great, and I love how the fact that you don't have to necessarily take a public opinion one way or the other. It's like, look, here's what's going on, whether you love, hate, and everything in between. Are you a believer? Are you a skeptic? Are you whatever? That was fantastic. Wow, I think that will probably be used by a lot of folks, I imagine, in the future. That type of intro, that was fantastic.
Well, I appreciate that, Lou. Like I said before, it's an honor to have you on the show. I've been following your work for a long time. A couple things off the top, I wanted to thank Matt Ford from the Good Trouble Show for helping to put this together.
Absolutely,
Um, yeah, and
absolutely.
mentioned that you've recently penned a book, Imminent. There will be a link to the description. I don't pull a whole lot of questions out of that because I feel like the moment's moved on a little bit, but
And
I
I hate
want.
plugging. I hate plugging my stuff. To be honest with you, let's just roll into questions, man. I always feel kind of sleazy when be like, oh, so tell us about X, Y, and Z that you put. I'm like, it's I don't know, man. It's. Please don't feel free to have to plug anything that I do. Just you know, uh, I appreciate it, but it's certainly not warranted. I'm happy just having a great conversation one on one. Well, I say one on one with you, but the reality is you and all your wonderful followers. So it is truly my honor and privilege to be here. Let me say that. And I'm really happy to be doing this. And whatever questions we don't get to, we can always circle back around later. And if your audiences have any specific questions, I'm happy to address them as well.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. So, of course, I want to start with Jake Barber. He has been the explosion in the field recently. He came out and he revealed a lot of things in a series of interviews. Each one was more descriptive and more revealing than the last. His most recent one was on Jesse's show, American Alchemy, and I read him as someone I can trust. It's hard to know, and sometimes in these topics, whether or not people who come out are always who they say they are. So that's what I wanted to ask you about. I mean, I know that you've said recently that he's someone who can be trusted. I wanted to sort of explore that with you. How do you know he's someone who can be trusted, and what do you think about what you've heard so far of his story?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, I don't know Jake personally, but I know people who do know him and have known him for some time, and these are also former special operators. So why I trust somebody like that is really primarily because of their pedigree. These are people that have routinely undergone extensive psychiatric evaluations for the purpose of maintaining a security clearance. They are special operators, which puts them not only in possession and access to classified information and very sensitive information, but more importantly, they are involved in operations that a lot of people over time can struggle with. So it takes a very special kind of person to work in those career fields. Furthermore, he's subject to random counterintelligence polygraph examinations and also to drug tests. So if anybody wants to say you're crazy, well, he's not, right? Because he gets the testing and the government saw him to be fit multiple times. And his job experience shows that quite evidently. Two, he's not on drugs because again, that's tested for. And then, the third issue is he lying? Well, again, the guy is subject to take, let me clarify, subject to taking routine polygraph examinations once you have a security clearance at the top secret level, like the rest of us, especially SEI. So, and then what do? You put somebody like that responsible for flying helicopters, doing very sensitive missions where life and limb are constantly at risk. So for that alone, I think he deserves to be paid attention to. Do I know him personally? No, I don't. Do I know of him? Yes, I do. And so that's why I think when people ask me, is he telling the truth? I think he's absolutely telling his truth. Now, again, this goes back to the bigger question between what is truth, right? Truth, believe it or not, people say, well, the truth is the truth, and there's no way around it. It's not true. It's relative. There's two types of truths. There is a universal truth like gravity, which affects us all, at 9.8 meters per second squared, based upon the mass of the Earth. And then you have personal truths. And those personal truths, like religious affiliations and political affiliations, can seem just as much as a universal truth to the individual, but when applied across a population, may not really be the truth and consider the truth by everybody. And so that's why I say that. I think he is telling his truth, just like I tell my truth, just like you tell your truth, right? the question is it a personal truth, or is it a universal truth, or is it both? Right. And so that's really the crux of the question. Is he telling the truth? I am absolutely certain he feels he is telling the truth. And I am certain that many people around him also believe he is telling the truth. Um, the real question is that truth going to be accepted by other individuals as also being the truth, or does it conflict with their version of a personal truth that, threatens perhaps a preconceived narrative or notion? And so we're really talking about human psychology at this point, right? You now have to kind of remove the word truth from the equation because it's relative. We just talked about that. And now we have to look at the individual. What is their background, and under other circumstances have they shown to always tell their truth and be correct? And so that's really where we're at in the conversation about human psychology. And if you amplify that to not just our friend here, Mr. Barber, but apply that to the entire UAP conversation writ large, and people who consider themselves part of the UFO or UAP community, quote unquote, a lot of those folks have their own personal truths, and those personal truths sometimes conflict with universal truths. And so you have this issue that we have now, where you have this polarization, even within the UFO community. I think most people agree that now it's real, but because their narratives of what it is differs from person to person, therefore that generates conflict. And so we're seeing it right now. I see it all the time with me. I see it all the time now with Mr. Barber. I see it with other individuals like my dear friend Chris Mellon and Al Pudoff and others. So therein lies a problem. That's really a human issue. That's not a truth issue. That's a human issue
Yeah.
that we need to recognize.
It's interesting, I mean, one of the things that Jake Barber said, which some people took as sort of a little bit of a surprise, that he had this sort of experience with this maternal, phenomenon that sort of seemed to be really a transformative and deep kind of spiritual experience. And some people, when they see people coming out of the IC, especially, they're like, well, they're going to have a certain national security lens to how they're interpreting this. And he seems to kind of embrace this idea that there may be something loving and positive about, at least this particular aspect of the phenomenon. But that's again, moving forward, that's going to be a matter for interpretation for everyone as we move forward, right? So, I mean, I kind of read you as saying like that's his interpretation of what he encountered, but let's not necessarily think that that's what all of this is going to end up being. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I mean, look, the bottom line is we're all human beings, and we all have cognitive bias. That's just the reality of it, right? Why do certain people prefer dating certain types of people? That's just the way it is. It's not right or wrong. It's just that's the way we look at life through a very specific lens based upon maybe cultural upbringing and religious upbringing and whatnot. And then we all have these little biases as well we carry along with us. Look, and I'm subject to it too, right? So the point is not to pretend we don't have these biases. The point is to recognize we all have these biases and then get all on the same page, right? So pretending like, well, no, no, that I don't have that type of, the way I feel is very neutral. Well, yeah, again, because you're biased. Don't look now, but your bias is showing. So I think we all need to recognize that up front, and really, that's a human issue. That's not a UAP issue. The way we interpret data, this is why I think, those interesting ink blot tests are so interesting, because you might see a butterfly and I see a dragon, and it's the same ink blot. Why is it that the exact same thing you're seeing is the exact opposite of what I'm seeing? There's two words in the English language, and being a former special agent, when you're going to court, you got to be very careful because words have meaning. There's some interesting words in the language, English language, two little words, very, very, very small words, that if you, depending on the pause and the hesitation of your voice in between these two words, when you put these two words together, in one circumstance they mean one thing, but in another circumstance they mean exact opposite. And so I'll give you a case in point. If I am walking down a dark alley in the middle of the night and I see somebody beating somebody up, and I say, "Don't stop," right? That means, hey man, stop doing what you're doing. That's you're hurting somebody. But if I'm, let's say, at a spa, right, which I don't go to spas, but let's say I did go to spas, and I had someone massaging me, and I say, "Oh man, don't stop," right? Same words, but exact opposite meanings. It's depending on my inflection and depending on that hesitation. And so, what someone interprets as saying, well, I thought they meant kept going. Someone else says, well, I thought they meant, stop what you're doing, right? Or if you come to even to it, let's say a stop sign, and I say, don't stop, right? Means go through it, unless there is maybe a dog walking across the street and say, don't stop. Now I want the person to stop. So again, this is a human issue, not necessarily a truth issue, because we all look at truths a little bit differently. And anybody who says that we don't, they're fooling themselves.
Yeah. I mean, just to dig down a little bit deeper on this interpretive thing, do you think how important is it that we keep our minds open about where this might be?
We have to,
Um,
we have to,
yeah,
we have to, we have to. Listen, James, with every challenge comes opportunity. There's no such thing as something you can't have good without bad, but you also can't have bad without good, right? So I'll give you case in point. I think we all agree that the horrible ending of World War II, which most people may say was necessary, where we killed a lot of civilians. I mean, we killed a lot of people when we dropped that atomic bomb, right? Horrible, horrible, horrible thing that was done in the efforts of hopefully saving more lives, right? But as a result of that technology, we also have nuclear technology, right? That is relatively. I know I'm going to get in trouble for this, but relatively clean energy, and it's very efficient. And we can power homes and power medical devices and life-saving technologies. So it's again, it's the interpretation and the extrapolation and the implementation of ideas that make something good or bad. The old term, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. And I witnessed that firsthand. So, you know, it's the same act. Where do you draw the line? And so I do think when you have people saying, well, I had this, this overwhelming feeling, sensation of XYZ, that may absolutely be true. Where other people, will report, hey, look, I had this moment, this feeling of dread and fear, right? Again, that's the interpretation of the human mind looking at something and then overlaying historical analytic bias that we've gathered over the years, just because we're humans, and then applying that so whatever we're seeing makes sense.
yeah. Thank you for that. Now, one of the things that I've noticed over time, especially as we've gotten further and further along in this conversation, is that there seem to be several groups who are kind of all pushing for the same thing. But you have like originally you and Chris Mellon and kind of the To the Stars crew, and then you have the former UAP task force folks,
Mhm.
and then even before that, you have the original Invisible College crew, who are sort of like the pater familia or whatever you want to call it of the
Yeah,
whole
faction.
conversation.
You have
Yeah.
faction, right?
Yeah, and so I'm wondering how much is there cohesion within that? Is there any cross-pollination? Is there a joint sense of mission? And do you guys communicate how you move forward on this stuff? And
Wow,
if so,
great.
how does it get led? I mean,
Never been asked that before. Great question. First of all, I think there's always, you can look at, and I hate to keep going back to this because I don't glamorize it in any way, but you can look at warfare and you can see that you have several factions or tribes that may be working for the same goal. Let's look at the United States. We have different agencies, whether it's FBI or CIA or Department of Defense, all working for the same goal of stabilizing a nation and potentially winning a conflict, but they're doing it different ways. They're doing it through their own, if you will, levels of expertise and experiences. So that's a good thing. That's a positive thing. The bad thing is that sometimes as well that leads to bifurcation. It leads to separation. We all have the common goal, but the way we decide to implement it may differ from group to group, and sometimes that can create friction. It can create friction because we're humans and we have things like pride and ego and these other aspects psychologically that motivate us even subconsciously. And so in there lies points of friction, but also in there lies points of cooperation. And yes, there is cross pollination. There's many people in those organizations you just mentioned, those different groups, factions that I'm personal friends with, and we continue. We can still have a difference of opinion on certain things, but we all agree that truth and transparency and disclosure is paramount. Now, how we achieve that? Well, you know, um, I kind of like the idea of factions personally because I think it democratizes the landscape. No one person is right. No one organization or group is right. Right. Everybody gets a fair shot to try it, and then let's see which is most successful. At the end of the day, the winner is the American public. It's the private citizens. Those are the ones that win, right? It's not taking credit and claim that, oh, I was right this whole time and yeah, you were wrong. It's not about that. It's about, hey, all ships rise with the tide. Let's continue working this collectively. As long as you're not doing this for self gain or selfish reasons, then I can support that. But if you're doing this just as a money grab or trying to go out and create drama and misinformation, then I have an objection to that because there's people's lives that are affected by this, and people can invest themselves in this topic a lot. And if you manipulate them on purpose for the purposes of self gain, trying to personal gain at their expense, that's called exploitation. And I do not agree with that. And I do not surround myself with people who feel that way either. To feel that it's okay to exploit other individuals, it's not okay. And so, within the factions, as long as the factions have their heart in the right place, I'll always support them.
Yeah. Like there's for you, there's a standard of integrity that you're going to make sure that these people that you're working with are going to maintain.
Yeah.
Cool. Now, so one of the things I was interested about is Barber came out and he said a lot of things. And so my first thought, or one of my first thoughts, was how much of this did Lou know, right, already? Like, I mean, we can't help but wonder what information you're sitting on in terms of your knowledge base. And wondering about that, plus the Dopser process. He comes out and he lays out a bunch of information that you couldn't or didn't. And so obviously you hadn't run it through the Dopser process. Is that something now that you can talk about? The stuff that he mentions and brought out, is that open source for the rest of us to kick around, even people who know it in its classified version?
Yeah, great question. Yes and no.
Okay.
In the government, we have a restriction. Just because it comes out in media does not mean that now we can talk about it. We're still obligated to protect classified information if it's classified. However, there is no mandate to protect information that is not classified, right? Or that has been classified for illegal purposes, like to cover, for example, embarrassment or malfeasance or something like that. It's very specific what you can classify. I have made it very clear for the last 7 years that my hope was one of the things I wanted to do is show people that you can come forward. And if you do it in the right way, we can continue driving the conversation more and more. If you look at in 2017, there was a lot that I couldn't say. And
Yeah.
over time, I've been able to say more and more and more and more. It's a gradual process. And it basically, for several reasons. One, I don't want to conduct an illegal act. I will not leak classified information. I will not compromise it, and I will not be responsible for an unauthorized disclosure. I
Yeah.
have not, and nor will I ever. I do take my oath very seriously. However, there's a lot of gray areas. There's a lot of information there that maybe I wasn't allowed to really discuss earlier on, but now it's become a little easier with the turnover of several administrations, and now you have the former director of the CIA and former director of national intelligence, and everybody coming out and saying, yeah, there's something here, right? So every time we it's like taking a beachhead. Every foot, every inch forward you advance on the beachhead, you try to secure it so you don't go back, right? And so, okay, now here's where we're going to start the campaign, the military campaign. Okay, now it's here. Well, okay, well now it's here, right? It's further being pushed, and then other whistleblowers say, you know what? I think I can take the beachhead too. I think there's a clearing enough room for me there. I'm going to come on board too, and I'm going to try to push the line a little more forward. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of what I was hoping would happen, and that's exactly what has happened. But with that said, I also have to give people enough room to maneuver themselves and not put themselves in any type of compromising situation.
Yeah.
And that's that's not always easy because people will say things that I have to kind of look at and say, ooh, maybe probably have gotten that cleared, right? Where there's other things they say that I'm saying, hey man, God bless you for saying it.
Yeah.
Now's the time to do it, and it can't just come from Lou Elizondo. It needs to come from other people. This can't be about me, and unfortunately, a lot of people think it is about me. They think it's about the messenger and not the message.
Yeah.
And I think that is for me, it's a personal challenge because they're not understanding my true motivation. They keep believing that there's these weird reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing because I'm trying to whatever misinform the American public or some other BS like that. When the reality is I'm actually doing this for them, the very people that hate me and tend to throw rocks at me. I'm actually doing this for them, and I want to see the information out because frankly, I'm not going to do this forever.
Yeah.
I don't want to do this forever. I want to eventually at some point retire, like I wanted to do, 8 years ago. Um, I want someone else to pick up the baton. I'm not the one to win this race. This is a relay race, and I've told people that disclosure is a marathon. It's not a sprint. I know people want their information right now, their way. I'm sorry, that's not the way this works. But I am hoping that we can get the truth out as quickly as possible without being destructive. I want to be constructive. And so it's important that we hear all people's perspectives. And yes, even the ones that maybe have some very interesting or unorthodox ideas, they deserve a voice too. But that what we don't do is have a right to drown other people out.
Yeah.
And I look at people's behavior. I've had people tell me one person had there was one individual that was really from day one attacking me, who never met me, had no idea, and it was just telling lies about me. And so, I made the off the cuff comment, I don't deal with terrorists. It wasn't that I was accusing the person of being a terrorist. It was simply, look, like we have the U.S. policy, I don't I don't respond to intimidation, right?
Mhm.
So if you want me to do something, just ask. Don't create a circus, because that I will not support. That's just for selfish gain for somebody trying to get attention. And of course, I say something like that, and people take it out of context, and they will use those type of words as weapons, because they haven't looked into, other than an inch deep, what we're trying to say, what we're trying to communicate here. And so this happens a lot of times in this topic with other individuals as well. Somebody says, I don't like chocolate ice cream. And then someone comes out with a post saying, Luis Elizondo hates ice cream. Well, no, that's not what I said. I don't prefer chocolate ice cream. I prefer strawberry or vanilla or pistachio or bubblegum or whatever. So, and I'm sure in the media, you as a reporter probably face the same thing sometimes. I'm sure that sometimes when you're writing an article, you get a little email that someone says, well, I didn't agree with this, or I didn't appreciate that. Well, I can respect that. You don't have to agree with it. But as far as appreciating it, the motivation, don't assign false motivations to something. And so that's a challenge we have right now in this conversation, because everybody, I think, I shouldn't say everybody, forgive me. Let me clarify. A lot of people see an opportunity to exploit this conversation for whatever personal or private purpose they want or have. And I don't think that's fair, because this is a conversation that's so important that we all, everybody deserves a seat at the table, but it's a round table, right? It's not a square. No one sits at the head of the table. And this is what I keep telling people about me too. I'm not sitting at the head of the table. I know people think I am, but this is a relay race. And I'm just waiting for the next person to pick up the baton so I can get off the racetrack. I'm not necessarily a fast runner anyway, so probably probably best to let someone a little younger and a little more energetic, continue that relay race. And so that's really, kind of my perspective, if you will.
Yeah. No, the reason why I mentioned the whole Dobster thing and whether or not that frees you up is because a lot of things came out with Jake Barber's, testimony that ring true for me because of all the things that I've been hearing and learning and the way that things have been talking, but have never really been put in quite so explicit terms. The psionic capabilities. I mean, I can see that happening as a result of the evolution of remote viewing and all of those sorts of things, and how it may have ended up into that space, or I mean, at least that was an express and early interest in that kind of thing. Um, but I wonder if any of that took you by surprise, and what you think that we should be feeling about this idea that there are people amongst us who may have special abilities, and are potentially figuring out how to network through the ether to drive these things and land them on the range.
Well, let's break down a little bit. When you say special abilities, every human has a special ability, right? Every human. There's people that can dunk a basketball, and for short, Latino guys like me, that's a miracle. I'd never be able to do that, not in a million years. And so people have physical abilities. People have intellectual special abilities, right? Look at Stephen Hawkins, right? Even though that maybe physically his body was compromised, his intellect, his mind was not, right? That's a special ability, right? That's that's
Sure.
that's a different type of special ability. Everybody has a special ability, if you will. You hear a superpower, so to speak. But at the end of the day, it's not really that super. It's just a specific skill set that may be shared with a smaller portion of the population. And so when you talk about things like psionics for the purposes of your audience, this is the idea or the notion that perhaps that UAP, there can be some sort of interaction between humans and the occupants, or if you will, the intelligence behind these UAPs, using an untraditional way to communicate. And so, what do I mean by that? And I'll get back to the Dobster thing. So I haven't forgot about that. But this is
Sure.
it's a the answer isn't so simple.
No, and
It's
this is a part that needs to be covered, and I'm very anxious to hear your thoughts on it.
so.
So please.
Let me ask you something, James. And I don't need to be personal, but do you have family members?
Yes,
Okay.
I have 4 kids and a wife and brothers and sisters, and
So don't take this wrong way, please. But do you love your children?
yeah, of course, more than
Prove it.
anything else in the whole world.
Well, prove it to me. How do you prove something that is there's no way, right?
There's no way. Yeah, yeah,
There's no way, right? It's
yeah.
just it's there is this. And by the way, I love my kids. My two daughters are the greatest
Sure.
achievement of my life, bar
Yeah.
none. But there's no way I can prove it. And also, the way I love my children may be felt differently than the way you love your children. We both love our children, but perhaps the way we experience that emotion may differ from person to person. And so when you're talking about human cognitive abilities, we have those right now all the time. I tell people there's a reason why doctors put little sensors on your head when you've been into a car accident and they're not sure you're dead yet. They're measuring your brainwave activity, right? The electrochemical processes that are occurring in the brain that can be detected, literally electromagnetic emissions that are coming organically from the human brain. Now think about that. We look at it today as common science, but that was certainly paranormal 100 years ago, being able to do that. You mean the human
Yeah.
brain is giving off these invisible waves and we can detect them with machines? Well, yeah. And it turns out that it's possible, potentially, to do the same where human brains can get in tune with one another. It's a reason why perhaps twins have a very special relationship beyond just, identical twins being physically identical. A lot of them have reported sharing emotions and sometimes sharing thoughts. Is it really paranormal, or is it just a very least understood phenomenon that involves human beings and nonverbal communication and interactions? Look, when two dogs enter a room, we can sit there and see there is some form of nonverbal communication going on. That's why they immediately know, hey, is this a threat or is this going to be a friend? I'm going to wag my tail, even if they've never met the dog before. So it may turn out that some of these abilities, whether it's reference in terms of psionics or remote viewing, which was a real program, by the way, that the CIA did, that used human cognition to try to conduct espionage on foreign adversaries. There was enough there to suggest that, yeah, there's a real science behind this. Now, it's probably not. The problem is because it's so not well understood, people kind of chalk it up to pseudoscience. But let's not forget that this little cell phone I'm holding in my hand and this computer I'm talking to you about, talking to you over, thousands of miles away, is using a concept once deemed paranormal, the electromagnetic spectrum, right? You mean there is a way to invisibly communicate information and thoughts at light speed across the planet using nothing more than a little device? Wait a minute. There's no way. And it turns out, yes, in fact, most of reality, most of life lies within a spectrum of the electromagnetic spectrum that is beyond human sight. Right? If you look at the electro-optical spectrum, which is how we judge, we call vision, visible light, is really just 0.0036% of the entire electromagnetic spectrum, which means we're only really perceiving, you know, 0.006 something of what's really out there. And that's why I tell people, look, we come out to Wyoming sometime and look at the beautiful night skies, and it's gorgeous. Now take that same part of the night sky and look at it through a radio telescope, and you see all sorts of different things, right? You can now see the ultraviolet and the X-ray spectrum and the infrared spectrum, and you see novas and galaxies, and you see nebulous clouds that you can't see with the human eye. And in fact, most of the universe lies outside of that narrow band of spectrum. So the same thing holds true with other stuff, regarding perception and potentially psionics and potentially these other things. Do we have the definitive information to substantiate that it works and how it works? Well, I think we're getting to the point where we realize that, yeah, there's probably something to it, and it probably does work, and it's probably based in quantum physics more than pseudoscience, but we still don't understand it, right? I mean, look, and people say, well, that's silly. How can we not understand, how something like that would possibly work? Well, we still don't understand gravity. Is gravity a field? Is it a graviton? Is it a particle? Is it a result of some sort of strong force that resides in a different dimension? And this is what we experience as gravity is a bleed over effect. There's all sorts of theories. We don't even understand gravity. We've been living with it ever since we've been as a species on this planet. So, case in point, there's a whole lot of reality we just simply don't understand. Now, as far as going back to Dopser, um, I can't I can't answer for somebody else whether somebody went to Dopser. All I always tell people is you probably should. It's the right thing to do. And yes, it's going to take a while, and yes, it's a pain in the butt. But at the end of the day, do it the right way.
And clearly, I mean, went through Dobster, I think, right? I mean, that's like he
Yeah.
wouldn't
Oh
be able
yeah,
to even say this stuff, or he'd be bad things would be happening to him at this point.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
Dopser is it's important. I tell people I've always said this. There's a difference between doing things right and doing things right now. And I believe that we only have one chance to do it right. So let's take our time and do it right.
So one of the main things that I really wanted to get into with you, and I don't know how much you know, what is the ontology that makes that the part about the psionics and sort of remote viewing and all of that? What is the ontology that most of the experts that you deal with have accepted as the basis? I mean, you just mentioned that we don't know why these things work, that there's no mechanisms, but I mean, what is the root of reality like if these things are actually possible?
Well, like I said, let's go back to when I asked you about the question about proving your love to your children. You love them, and there's no way you're going to be able to prove it. You can't. You can tell me all day long. There's mass murders out there that said, "Oh, I love my family," and they wind up, doing horrible things to them. Um, there's no way to prove it, but it's real because you experience it, and it's the same thing I think with other people who may experience, the mental phenomenon, whether it's remote viewing or what people say the vernacular psychic abilities. Look,
Yeah.
law enforcement agencies to this day employ psychics to help solve murders. And you know what? They do. And sometimes they find bodies where nobody else could find one. And all of a sudden, someone says, hey, you need to look right here. And poof, there you go. So just because you can't explain something doesn't mean it's not real, right? Um, so I think that's really we're now getting back to the human psychology piece. We have a hard time accepting things that which we don't understand, and so we build anecdotes and stories to try to help explain things. Human beings love tight little boxes. We love to know where we are. We love to know our boundaries, and that's the reason why if you look at modern day streets, north, south, east, west, and they kind of go into these grid patterns because we like order. We like making sense of our environment. That's the reason why we have things like speed limits and rules and laws, because it gives us a sense of understanding. The moment you remove those barriers, then people get very, very insecure. I often tell people if you really want to have an interesting exercise, and particularly as it relates to human psychology and the way we interpret information, and I've done this before. Uh, get on Google one day, just type in the word pale blue dot and take a look at that and then realize what you're actually seeing. Now, some people will look and wonder and go, wow, and become very humble and amazed and say, wow, that is truly incredible. Other people will get very uncomfortable and they get very fearful and very insecure. And once you realize that actually I'm on this obscure little ball of rock hurtling around an obscure star that we call, a third generation star that we call the sun, hurtling around an obscure part of a galaxy we call the Milky Way, and obscure part of the universe next to other thousands and hundreds of thousands of galaxies, and you're constantly moving. There is no being in the same place at the same time ever again. That is not the way reality works. Um, that can be very uncomfortable for some people, but for other people, it can be very inspiring, right? And so it's the same data, but it's how we interpret it. And I think when we're talking about things like psionics and remote viewing, and they have those words, they're labels, like anything else, and people will take those labels, and depending on who you are and maybe your personal bias, it might mean something different to you. You might say, "Oh, that's a bunch of mumbo jumbo BS," and someone else says, "No, actually, we did scientific studies. There's something to it." Right? Um,
Over and over and over again.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So, the one thing it's the hubris of humanity that's the challenge. It's
right.
not
Yeah,
the
of course.
topic, it's the hubris of our species.
we've got it all figured out, right? I mean, we don't. I mean, science has it
Right.
pegged, and so therefore anything that lies outside of our models isn't real or is a fantasy. I guess what I was trying to get at though is basically like among the people that you are deal with, and you deal with some of the smartest, dudes and women on the planet, and we've mentioned some of their names, and
Heck of a lot
what
smarter than me, that's for sure.
but what's the model that they're working with in terms of reality? Do you have a, can you, or what's your like ontology in terms of how you think all this is working? I mean, do you feel like consciousness is primary? Do
Well,
you feel,
consciousness, of course it is. We just talked
okay,
about that. One of the primary fundamental motivations of a human species is really two things: love and fear. Love and fear drive 99% of the decision-making processes that we humans decision points that we humans face. If you really look at it, it's really the two things. It's fear and love. And fear, you can look at things like fight or flight. From a physical perspective, you can look at it as a potentially emotional anguish. Why people are afraid of certain things, whether it's tax time or maybe meeting with an old loved one or maybe an old boyfriend or girlfriend. Uh, Fear is why we have many cases war because we don't trust or understand each other, right? Because you're one of them, and you're not one of us. A very very tribalistic way we look at things instead of looking at collectively us as a whole. And then love. We're motivated to do what we do. It's the reason why the single mother comes home every single night and she's exhausted and she makes food for her kid and she does homework with her kid and she does what he does. She does what she does because it's love, right? It's a reason why a mother will run out in the middle of traffic, oncoming cars with, facing assured death to save her child from being run over by a car. So those emotions are very, very important. And we need to recognize that those emotions drive a lot of our decision-making process and also the way we interpret data, the way we bring in information and we process that information in our brain and then, come to some sort of conclusion. Um, and I think it's that bias that really prevents us from understanding things. Now with that said, we have always been plagued with this. This is nothing new. This is something that we've been dealing with for a very long time. And I would submit to you that there are these moments in human history where they're kind of like breakout moments, really, where we shed an old way of thinking about things and realizing something different. For example, when Galileo first proposed the heliocentric model of our solar system versus the Earth centric, right? People were scared. They almost burned him at the stake and they made him recant, even though he was right. In fact, they refused to even look through the very telescope to prove his theory, right? So think how frustrating that is. And now we look back, and we say, "Oh, that's silly," right? Well, but this is what we were.
same
Oh,
thing.
yeah, we do it with ourselves all the time, and we're still
Yeah,
doing it today, right? And
yeah.
and we don't even realize we do it subconsciously. Most Americans, when you ask them, what's your political affiliation, they say, "Oh, I'm a lifelong Democrat or I'm a lifelong Republican." The reality is most people agree probably on 80% of everything together, and they only differ on a few things, right? But they use those differences to draw lines in the sand and say, well, this is my flag and that's your flag, right? Um, and I don't think that's helpful, but there are these moments where we break out of our current existing paradigm. I'll share with you a story that I've shared just a few times. Um, we mentioned that our daughters are the greatest achievements and accomplishments of our lives. My daughter Taylor, we lived on when I was a Fed in DC. We lived on a little island in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay called Kent Island, and we would every night, my daughters and I, we'd walk down to we had like this little dock in the neighborhood. We could go down by the beach and look at the waves come in and whatnot. And my daughter said to me, she's like, "Daddy, why is that little blue crab?" Maryland, of course, being famous for blue crabs. Says, "Why is that little blue crab so small and that other blue crab so big? And how does a little blue crab become a big blue crab?" And I said, "Well, sweetheart, it has to do with nature and reality. And so what happens, there's this process called molting. When the little crab begins to grow and outgrow its shell, it has to break out of that shell. And then for a few days, it doesn't have a shell until it has another shell." And she said, "Well, Daddy, isn't that painful, isn't that uncomfortable for the crab?" And I said, "Well, yes, it probably is, but it's also necessary because what will happen is if that little crab stays in its shell for too long, that shell that was there to protect it and to keep it safe winds up becoming a prison, and the crab will never be able to grow." And so in order for the crab to grow, it must break out of its shell and make a new shell. And this happens all the time. It's the way nature does things. And that's how that little crab becomes a big crab. And the same thing is with human beings. We have to be willing to challenge ourselves of preconceived notions, even the things that make us comfortable and confident. We have to be willing to push those boundaries and break out of certain paradigms if we are to evolve into a newer understanding of what life really is and reality really is. And that's not an easy process. It's like the little crab shedding its shell. I'm sure for a lot of people, it's very uncomfortable. It makes people very insecure. Hell, it makes me insecure. But it's necessary. It's part of you have the evolution of the species, but you also have it's not just the species evolving physically. There's also a mental, emotional, and intellectual evolution of a species that must also coincide with the overall evolution. That's how evolution actually works. It's not just a physical evolution. There's processes going on beneath the surface that evolve it into eventually something completely different. And that is the way Mother Nature wants it to work. That is how it works. But in one's lifetime, these moments where you break out of a shell don't really happen very often in one's particular lifetime. They tend to happen as a society, every few hundred years, typically. And I think we're just experiencing one of these right now, where maybe society is realizing maybe the universe is far more complex and bigger than we really ever imagined, and we have to come to grips with it.
So, I mean, basically, we're coming up on a major cognitive revolution, in terms of what the nature
Which
of
is
reality
normal.
is.
It's normal.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be feared. This is we're destined to do this. In fact, you either evolve or you stagnate. And we know from the way nature works, life is constantly evolving. If not, you go extinct. So this is, like it or not, this is the way we are supposed to be.
One of the things that you've been sort of quoted as saying quite often is that humanity is adjusting or will have to adjust to the idea that we're not at the top of the food chain. That statement seems to imply predation of some sort, that there is a relationship where maybe some higher intelligence uh, uses us in some way for nourishment or that sort of thing. Can you?
There's a difference between predation and exploitation. Okay.
Okay.
We could certainly be exploited, but we could also be like ants on the Serengeti. Does the bull or the Cape buffalo or the cheetah that's walking in the desert chasing its food really pay attention to the ant? No, it doesn't. It doesn't really care it's even there, right? Is the ant at the top of the food chain? Certainly not. But it's also not necessarily being, preyed upon, right? It might not even be exploited. It might just be just inconsequential. And it's again, these are one of those things that really bother people because they feel that it's, makes them feel insecure because we're always used to being like the alpha, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is we're not. I mean, talk to any scuba diver and get them into the ocean, with a bunch of great whites, and you realize really, really quickly you're not at the top of the food chain. You know?